Hey folks, the Comics Kid 2099 here, and just like every Saturday, I'm here to talk to you about an episode of a superhero animated series. Today I'll be talking about an episode of Batman the Animated Series titled Harley and Ivy. If you ain't seen the episode, you should, if you don't like spoilers, because I'm about to spoil lots of stuff. And if you don't care about spoilers, then you can stick around as I sum up the episode before I get into the review itself. We begin with Batman chasing the Joker and Harley Quinn. The escape is a narrow one, and the Joker blames Harley for his own stupidity and ineptitude and kicks her out of his gang. Harley goes on to rob a diamond from a museum and runs into Poison Ivy also stealing stuff. They decide to team up to show the chauvinistic men of the world that women are better. After a while, Joker begins to miss using Harley as a punching bag and tracks her down, just as Batman does as well. All fire breaks loose, literally, as Batman apprehends the Joker while Renee Montoya apprehends the ladies in a special bit of poetic justice as well as just regular justice. The episode ends with Harley thinking there's still hope for her and the Joker to get back together. Cue credits. So unlike most of the internet, I've never been a huge fan of Harley Quinn. Sure, she's a new addition to the Batman Rogues Gallery, and I am always up for new villains to be added to the toy box, but I've always felt that adding a permanent sidekick to the Joker somehow lessens him as a presence, unless you can find some way to make the sidekick just a temporary thing, like how Robin is only sometimes seen working with Batman like in this series. And also, Harley is just fundamentally wrong as a character. She is a cartoonish representation and exaggeration of every human being who has a scumbag for a significant other, but can't seem to recognize or willfully chooses to ignore that the scumbag is no good for them and they need to move on to someone else. And in all of the episodes that Harley has appeared in so far, this aspect hasn't been overly conspicuous. In her debut in Joker's favor, we get a small glimpse of Joker being overbearing and stamping out any hint of Harley being funnier or more competent as a villain, but it wasn't really in our faces like it is here. But in this episode, my disdain for Harley really comes to the forefront, because, you see, there's nothing wrong with having a character who gets weak in the knees when they hear the voice of their sociopathic tormentor. After all, if every single character in all of fiction was strong, confident, and able to say no when their no-good beau came a-calling, then all of fiction would be way too homogenous, and the worse for it. We need a little bit of variety for characters who populate our stories. But on the other hand, Harley resolutely refuses to go through her character arc and see that the Joker is a subhuman piece of excrement. From this point forward, anytime the Joker pushes her so hard that she flies out the door of their hideout, it's impossible for me to feel even an ounce of sympathy for her, because she's had her chance to dump his sorry keister 100 times over. I think part of my issue is that we aren't given much of a reason to like Harley. The defining, nay, the only piece of her character that we really have is that she is in love with Mr. J, which, as I've mentioned, doesn't work for me. If there was something else to her, then maybe I could get to a point where I like her as a character. And that's not going to be very easy here, because this is a series of 22-minute installments, and she doesn't even appear in every single one, so it would take a very long time to finally develop her from being a caricature and into a fully realized character, which, as I understand, did finally happen in the episode Mad Love, which I have not yet seen, but I have read the comic book that episode was based on. But again, that was 7 years after Harley Quinn first appeared. It took them 7 years to finally turn her into a fleshed out character and not a one-dimensional joke. But I am getting long-winded. I haven't even gotten around to talking about the episode yet. So like I said, I don't like Harley Quinn. But this episode does something inspired. It takes her away from the Joker and pairs her with another character, Poison Ivy. Now sure, in the end, she is still pining after the Joker, but this episode does at least go one step in the right direction by showing us what could be done with Harley. Now, I had never seen this episode before preparing for this review, and my only exposure to the pairing of Harley and Ivy was reading the 3-issue comic book miniseries written by Paul Dini and illustrated by Bruce Timm some years ago. And while this is not a review of that miniseries, I will say that story plays Harley as being the naive, less experienced villain of the pair, and Ivy as the grizzled, cynical one who has been around the block a few times and knows what she's doing. And I think my favorite aspect of this episode is that isn't exactly the direction that this episode goes. Yeah, Ivy is the adult in the pairing when it comes to Harley's relationship with the Joker, but when it comes to being a villain, Harley is the one who is better, or at least they are on equal footing in this episode anyway. Harley would have gotten away with that diamond without a hitch if it hadn't been for Ivy screwing things up, and Harley's quick thinking is what gets them out of the museum. And speaking of the museum, let's talk about that for a little bit. It's really stupid that a museum that carries big diamonds would have a laboratory and would be carrying plant toxins in said laboratory. I get that this is so that Harley and Ivy can run into each other, but it's still stupid. Furthermore, why is Ivy even stealing those toxins? toxins. She's always been about saving the rainforest, and she's never been short on plant toxins to use as a weapon in previous episodes. Again, I know that it's so that the plot can move along at a brisk pace, but this cluster of stupidity took me right out of the episode, and it took me a few minutes to get back in. And speaking of stupidity, let's talk about the air of women are better than men that Harley and Ivy espouse throughout the entire episode. Anytime this sort of thing happens, it reduces my enjoyment of the thing by about 30%, and not just because I'm a dude. If this was two dudes palling around talking about how much women suck, I would have hated it just as much. And yeah, these ladies have some good reason to hate one man in particular, and that man is the Joker. But then to generalize and say that all men suck because of the actions of one or a few, that's a level of stupidity that I am just not going to get into, mostly because this review is already way too long. Fortunately, this really isn't a case of the episode preaching this sort of philosophy, but is two characters in the episode preaching it, which is a little bit better. I'm sure I could think of a few other things to say about this episode, but since I've gone on so long already, I'm going to end this video now and ask you guys what you thought of this episode. Like it? Hate it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you liked this video, then be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you did like this video, next week I'll be doing a review of an episode of Batman Beyond, and the week after that I'll be tackling the two-part Shadow of the Bat episode of Batman the Animated Series. And I do other kinds of videos throughout the week, so be sure to check those out as well. In the meantime, have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you later.